I want to conclude before we do questions by talking a little bit about what's happening in terms of our presidential elections, because it's not disconnected. What we have seen and what I have written about over the past few years is the collapse of liberalism within American society, and in particular my book, Death of the Liberal Class, focused on this issue. And that book goes back to the First World War and looks at what Dwight MacDonald calls, after World War I, the infection of American society with the psychosis of permanent war, the constant war to ferret out communists or those who are soft on communism, which was used by Wilson, one of our most despicable presidents, to destroy those radical movements, progressive movements, populist movements that had, as Noam Chomsky points out, put pressure on the liberal establishment to carry out incremental or piecemeal reform. That all of the openings in American democracy have always been driven, and this is what Howard Zinn makes clear in his book, The People's History of the United States, have been driven by these outside movements that never achieved formal positions of power. The Liberty Party that fought slavery, and the abolitionists, the Wobblies, the old CIO, that carried out the labor wars in this country, which were the bloodiest labor wars in any industrialized nation. Hundreds of American workers were murdered. Tens of thousands were blacklisted and pushed out of their jobs. The suffragists and the civil rights and anti-war movements of the 1960s. And that's why, as Ralph Nader points out, our last liberal president was Richard Nixon. Not because he was a liberal or a conscience, but because there were movements that put pressure on him to pass the Mine and Safety Act, OSHA, the Clean Water Act, all of which were written by Ralph. And there's a scene in Kissinger's memoirs, do not buy the book. It's 1971, there's a giant anti-war demonstration surrounding the White House. Nixon has taken empty city buses end to end and put them all around the White House as a barricade. And he says, he's looking out the window and he says, "Henry, they're going to break through the barricades and get us." And that's just where we want people in power to be. We have to stop putting our faith in particular political leaders, including Bernie Sanders. We have to understand that the only way we are going to confront the evil of corporate capitalism is by going out in the street and obstructing the ability of this movement to repress, exploit, and kill. And that destruction of our radical movements left us utterly disempowered, as it was meant to. We don't even have the vocabulary anymore to explain to ourselves the class warfare that is being unleashed upon us. And as Chomsky says, that liberal class, that liberal entity, was designed as a kind of safety valve to ameliorate the capitalist system and protect it. And in the myopia of the corporate elites, they've not only destroyed those radical and progressive movements, but they've destroyed the liberal establishment itself, giving birth to this faux liberalism embodied in figures like the Clintons and Barack Obama.
Yeah.
So it's under Clinton that you get NAFTA, the greatest betrayal of the working class in this country since the 1948 Taft-Hartley Act. It's under Clinton that you get the destruction of the welfare system, and 70% of those recipients were children. It's under Clinton that you get the deregulation of the FCC, and we end up with goons like the CEO of CBS saying, well, Trump may not be good for America, but he's good for corporate profit. Which translates into, why not fascism if I can make money? It's under Clinton that you get the 1994 omnibus crime bill that explodes the prison population and has made, I believe, mass incarceration the most important civil rights issue of our day. And it's under Clinton that you get the destruction of Glass-Steagall, which created firewalls between commercial and investment banks and precipitated the national and global economic crisis.
That's right.
And Clinton did it because he got corporate money. By the 1990s, the Clintons had fundraising parity with the Republicans, or the Democrats did, and in 2008, Obama got more. But that failed liberalism creates, in essence, political paralysis. The government, captured by a narrow, tiny, oligarchic corporate elite, is unable and unwilling to respond to the most basic grievances of the American public or protect their interests. We are far less secure, far less safe because of the actions of our Republican and Democratic administrations in the Middle East than we were on 9/11. And this paralysis has come with a very mendacious and hypocritical vocabulary, one that unfortunately many in the left bought into. And it is the boutique activism of multiculturalism and diversity and inclusivity, all of which I support, but not when it is severed from justice. Especially economic justice for poor people of color in this country. And so while the self-identified left was busying itself with, and let's be clear, inclusivity and multiculturalism and diversity within elite institutions and for elites, they weren't doing anything for oppressed people and women of color. It gave to the national discourse a rhetoric that boomeranged into the proto-fascism that we are watching rise around Donald Trump. Because the Clintons, like Obama, have done nothing for the poor, and in particular, poor people of color. And yet they use that language. And so a disenfranchised white, lower class, working poor, who knows what's been done to themselves, their families, and their communities, hears the rhetoric and believes the demagogues that the reason for their distress is because marginal groups, undocumented workers, Muslims, homosexuals, and let me just throw in here to my Muslim brothers and sisters, you have to fight homophobia within your communities. They believe it. They believe it because of the mendacity of a bankrupt liberal elite. And Richard Rorty, in 1998, in his last book, Achieving Our Country, wrote, prescient, that in post-industrial America, we would see a rise among nativist, lower-class whites who would revolt against the college-educated elites, because let's be clear, all those people working at Goldman Sachs, I've taught some of them at Princeton. Those college-educated elites, and we see it with the establishment attempting to denounce Trump, people like Romney, who are con artists along with Trump. That what you would see, Rorty says, is this attempt on the part of white nativists not only to turn against a liberal establishment that spoke in that feel-your-pain language but had betrayed them, but also against the purported values that they represented. And so, because that liberal elite sold us out, it is not only being pushed aside, but the civility that it sought to teach to the underclass is being pushed aside with it. And there is a word for that. It is called fascism. And it is real. And I watched it in the former Yugoslavia. Very same phenomena. Economic meltdown of Yugoslavia. A weak and discredited liberal establishment that betrayed the working class, and the rise, vomiting up out of the bowels of a decayed system, figures like Radovan Karadzic or Slobodan Milosevic or Franjo Tudjman. And we are not immune from that process. And with the destruction of the left, and the repeated failure by the left to grasp that the Democratic Party establishment is a force designed to destroy progressivism and liberalism, a genuine concern, an egalitarian concern for the working poor has essentially been dropped out of the equation. And it's our job to bring it back. And it will only happen when we are willing to stand up, even if no one stands up with us. And that means that there can be no compromise. I mean, the problem with the Sanders campaign, aside from the fact that he is about to start campaigning for Hillary Clinton. No. Yes, he will. He's already said he will. And he campaigned for Bill in 92 and 96 after Clinton had passed NAFTA and the Omnibus Crime Bill and destroyed welfare. I mean, let's be clear about Sanders. He's a Democrat. He always has been. And he has seniority within the caucus. He has been the main obstacle of third-party movements in Vermont. The Democrats won't run anyone against him because of that quid pro quo. But the major problem is that he doesn't understand that unless we destroy the war machine and empire, this country is going to go right down the tubes. We are destroying ourselves the way empire always destroys itself, expanding beyond the capacity to sustain itself, hollowing itself from the inside. I spoke in Albany yesterday. City after city, not just in upstate New York, but throughout the country. Empty warehouses, empty factories, massive homeless population, fictitious unemployment figures. Real unemployment, as the LA Times pointed out, is about 17%. And what happens with empires is that the brutal forms of control they use on the outer reaches of empire, as the heart of empire is destroyed, are brought back into empire. Drones, wholesale surveillance, militarized police. 3.1 of our citizens are murdered every day, almost all of them unarmed, on the streets of our cities. Empire is the enemy. The US military, the Pentagon, the security and surveillance state are the most dangerous and insidious forces lurking within the body politic and must be utterly defanged if not destroyed. And that has to be the baseline for any political calculation that we make or any activism that we take. Because these people don't care how many people die in Iraq, Americans or Iraqis. They don't care how many people die in Yemen. They don't care how many people die in Pakistan or Afghanistan or Somalia. How many people live in terror 24 hours a day from drones? How many people are tortured in our blood? They don't care. Because it's all about profit. And until we stop them, nothing will change. Thank you.